Good fun. We will have good fun from now on.
Maybe we fight outside the car.
I think it's gonna get more and more exciting, the championship.
Is it possible to be equal in the championship?
No. Can only be one winner. Anyway.
The psychology of a racing driver is a big part of his performance. I always said 70–80%. It's very subjective, but it's a big part. And as soon as you feel that you have a sort of advantage or sort of preference, or, you know, I remember very well once I've seen the engines coming, you know, and was written on the engine special for Ayrton, you know, things like this. What does that mean? Is the engine better, or maybe it's exactly the same, or I don't know. But you don't want to see that. You want to have equal treatment, and inside the team it started to be a problem. It was only psychology, you know. But for me, I did not feel very well, you know, and I felt a big difference between '89 and '88, and I still do not understand why.
It was a very emotional time, because when you've got a Prost and a Senna next to one another in the same team in a really good car, you're always going to have all these emotions and thoughts, and everything's going to be at a peak all the time. So there's going to be very little measured thought about anything.
If you find yourself in the fortunate position of having two highly competitive drivers, they're going to be a handful. There's no question. And especially if they're coming from very different cultures. They would say lots of things in the national press that would inevitably feed back, because the French would get all the Brazilian newspapers and vice versa. They'd come to a Grand Prix and then they would say, Prost said this in France, or Senna said that in Brazil, and then the whole thing would erupt again, of no speaking and no cooperation, etc., etc. But what a wonderful problem to have.
In Japan, Prost was comfortably ahead on points, but I think we have to remember that Senna had actually won more races that year, so knowing Ayrton, that would always have rankled him, that he hadn't had the finishes that Prost had had in the points. And in the midst of all that, I think Prost has to be given credit for being the more measured of the two at that time.
The people went to see a race knowing that McLaren was going to win, and they were going to be able to watch the best two drivers of the world battling each other on equally identical cars.
It was certainly a rivalry like I haven't seen, and that was the day it came to a head.
Ron was the first to insist that we let you drive, but please don't do anything stupid, don't run into each other. Think of all the workforce that we have helping you to be there and so on.
Ego and ambition are very close bedfellows. And very often people will misunderstand the intenseness that you bring to your ambition, and it will look very often that you have a ginormous ego, and people will never give you the benefit of the doubt. And anyone that achieves in life, in my opinion, has that fine line. It's a fine line. There's instances where there's it's on the edge of or over acceptability, and then you've got to take difficult decisions.
Prost who took the lead at the start against all expectations. For the first 10–15 laps, kind of disappeared into the distance. And I'm sure at that stage Senna must have been in shock.
I really had a perfect car. I was doing what I wanted to. I was really putting him in a little bit away, and I was much quicker. There's no question about that.
Prost had taken the gurney flap off pretty much last thing. He reckoned, therefore, his car would be quicker in a straight line, and that was going to work for him, and it did.
Ayrton was so upset, and he said, whatever happened, if we're going to get together, I'm not going to slow down. So he was just adamant that something was going to happen.
And I said to them, that's the last race. I'm not going to open the door anymore. You know, I mean, I prefer to lose the championship, you know, but I'm not going to open the door anymore.
Well, it's going to be constant attack, 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 because Senna has got everything to gain and nothing to lose. Alain Prost can see the McLaren Honda of Senna big in his mirrors.
Senna reeled him in, reeled him in, reeled him in. And it was obviously going to come down to a showdown, and the showdown was obviously going to be at the chicane because, you know, it's the only passing place at Suzuka.
Oh my goodness, this is fantastic! They meet. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship.
There was no question that Alain turned into Senna, no question. What he didn't do was do it well enough to take Senna out the race.
Prost did absolutely the right thing to shut the gate, in my view, because A, the championship position he was in, because the worst that was going to happen was they'd both be taken out, and B, it wasn't a place where it was going to get him anyway, unless he was, you know, unless Prost was making it easy for him.
It was such a bad race for us because we got there, we were quickest in practice, quickest in qualify. We did our job, we put the cars first and second in the grid, we were leading the race, and then end up with nothing on your hands. It's just, it was very disappointed, to say the least.
I did actually walk back down to the pits with Prost, so I was the first person to speak to him after the incident. I remember all Alain could say was, I couldn't believe he did it on that lap. I just, because there had been laps when he'd actually been closer than that, and he hadn't tried it. And he said, and I looked in my mirrors coming up to the chicane, saw where he was, and kind of thought, well, you know, he ain't going to try it this time. But he did. He came rushing down the inside, and of course they touched.
The problem with the drivers is that when you're sitting in that car, you put the visor down, you think of nothing but winning the race or do the best you can. And those kind of movements Alain did to Ayrton, like Schumacher have done many times in his career, they came instantly. They do it because that's what they do it. You don't do that, you're not a racing driver. So it's something that no matter how much you tell the drivers, it happened and it will happen again.
I couldn't blame Prost too much. I thought, well, you know, if I was a team manager and I saw Prost not close the door, I'd be a bit disappointed in him. I thought it was an understandable defensive move. And probably, effectively, Senna should have seen it coming and not put himself in that position.
You know, we'd seen various times during that year when Prost had given Ayrton a bit of room to avoid a shunt, and maybe Ayrton had done the same thing. But on this occasion, a championship decider, there's no way Prost was going to do that. And I don't think Ayrton took that into account.
But I remember Keke Rosberg saying, I said, well, did you think Prost did it deliberately? He said, I think so, yeah, because he did it so badly. He said, you know, Alain Prost never turned in on anybody in his life. When he did do it, he said, you know, everybody thought, you know, it wasn't subtle, it was obvious. Be that as it may, Mario Andretti's point was the right one, that if Prost hadn't been there, Senna would never have made that corner on that line at that speed. He would just have gone straight on into the escape road.
Everybody would think what they want to, you know, even run. But he was going so fast behind that, I mean, I did not see him. I was looking at the mirror, he was quite far. And then when I turned and I look at him, I could not believe that he was there. But obviously, I didn't change, and I didn't do another turn, I didn't change. I've done exactly what I told them I was going to do. But honestly, I'm very disappointed about this race. You know why? Because I did not win it.
He went out the escape road back onto the track rather than what Jean-Marie Balestre and the FIA said at the time was he should have turned around and rejoined where he'd left the track.
Senna has got going again. He's back on the track.
And Senna is still leading. Senna with this twisted nose cone.
The bit that just made me explode was the fact that the whole thing was manipulated by Jean-Marie Balestre. So Senna came back onto the circuit and basically, brackets, did not enter the circuit at the point of exit. They deemed that he should have turned round, driven against the traffic and entered at the point of where he exited.
I was in that race, but as always, when you've got your crash helmet on, you're driving your own car, you don't notice a whole lot about what's going on around you unless you gain some positions. Ayrton had his brain engaged fully in Suzuka 1989. Instead of thinking, I'm out of the race, he's like, how do I get back in this race? Get the marshals to push me. Get me back in this somehow.
He did a lap with the nose hung off, came into the pits, we changed the nose on the car, then he went out, called up everybody and won the race.
Ayrton Senna wins in Japan. Is there going to be a stewards' inquiry? Alain Prost will have one if he can.
Irrespective of all the evidence that we presented at the Suzuka and afterwards in the appeal, Balestre was just saying, there is no way, Alain, no way that I'm going to let Senna win that race. That was the bit that I was upset about. The accident, look, they're competitive. A sense of injustice just drove into me. And, you know, it was just so unjust. But it's not unusual in Formula 1. Things like that happen.
You know, the problem with Ayrton, he can't accept that, he can't accept not to win, and he can't accept that somebody resists by an overtaking maneuver. And a lot of times, if you remember last year and this year, I opened the door, and if I did not open the door, we would have crashed like this. And I said before the race, if that happened, I don't open the door anymore. The way he drives is very good, I must say. It's absolutely unbelievable quick. But for me, I mean, it's driving too hard. I mean, you know, it's and if you have two drivers like this in Formula 1, then you have accident every race. Ayrton was very, very strong in his head, very, very strong, unbelievable. But then we started something that we could not control, and until the point where if you go to 1990, 1 year after, you can see that he did not forget, but he had his strong idea. And that was absolutely not objective, not objective.